Good afternoon. At this time, I'll call our City Council work session to order. Our first item for discussion is the City Assessor's Annual Report to Council.
Okay. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, at this time, we invite City Assessor, Mr. Holt Butt, to the podium. Billy?
Good evening, Mayor Duman, Vice Mayor Ward, members of council. Pleased to be here tonight to present my annual reassessment for real property here in Suffolk. My presentation tonight, I'll give a brief overview of our authority and responsibilities, our mission. I'll highlight some of our day-to-day functions, and I want to talk for a minute about some investments and initiatives we have and are putting in place since I've been here. I'll provide a look at the market and proposed assessment levels and provide a brief summary of where we go from here. So assessors get their authority from Chapter 32 of Title 58.1 of the State Code, which tells us to list and maintain records on all real property to ensure that the burden of taxation rests equally upon property owners, to ensure that assessments are uniform among classes of properties, and to strive for 100% of fair market value. So there's many definitions of market value out there, and I won't read this other than to say that this definition is the definition that stood the test of time here in the state of Virginia, and more importantly, the test of the courts. So again, like the fair market value statement, I won't read this, but this is our mission statement, and I will say that this is our purpose for being. It's a statement of what we do, why we do it. It also affirms my duty to the service of the citizens of the city of Suffolk. As you can see here, some of our duties involve data collection, data analyses, record keeping and verification, and of course, providing assistance to the citizens. So I wanted to take a minute tonight to talk about some of the highlights of my first 2 years. First of all, we've made some great human capital investments. And of course, you all know my deputy, Kevin Prine, and all that he brings to the table. We've also shored up our commercial team with a great new hire there. We've hired a couple outstanding residential appraisers and added them to that team. We're currently implementing some changes to the management team to bolster that side of the house. We've promoted a higher degree of staff development through educational objectives and opportunities meant to bolster productivity, efficiency, and more consistent outcomes. We've revamped an outdated career progression program, which actually didn't promote progression at all. Now we have a clear path drawn for staff promotions through educational and dedicated service initiatives. We have promoted morale-boosting staff engagement opportunities through the establishment of inter-office committees, such as our Strategic Planning Committee, the Professional Development Committee, Social Events Committee, and the Community Outreach Committee. We've made huge strides in the use of some of the technology that was here when I arrived but wasn't being used. For example, when processing a supplemental assessment, it was all done before outside of our system, and it generated all this paper that went around to the various people that had to review it and approve it. And we've utilized our CAMA system, which you all made a big investment in a few years ago, to do all that inside the system. So the old way, we'd produce this huge stack of papers, it's 20-some pages long for one supplement, and it had to go around to the management team to be approved and signed off on. Now all of this is done in the system. All these documents are scanned in to the property record, and they're there forever. And this is what we used to produce. This is what we produce now as far as paper. There's none. So That's actually helped, obviously, with our efficiencies, but it's also helped with morale building in the office as well. We're ramping up the use of our mobile assessor devices, which had never been used. They were sitting in a closet for a while. We've got them out, and that's going to really increase our efficiencies out in the field as well. And lastly, we've invested in and are in the testing stage of a new website. This website will not only reduce call volume to our office, but because of all the information that it's going to provide, and we're partnering with other departments in the city, we think it will reduce call volumes citywide, honestly. So we're really looking forward to that, and hopefully later in the spring, I'll be standing up here doing a presentation on the new website and be able to show you how it works. So that's a little bit about what's been going on and what we do. Now I think it's time to turn our focus on what the market's been doing over the last year. So as we go through this part of my report, I would remind you that this report is retrospective. It's not a forecast of what's to come, but a look back at what happened in the market in 2022. The market was very strong going into the first of the year with levels of appreciation we haven't seen in quite some time. That continued for the first 6 or 7 months, in spite of increasing interest rates, as shown above. As the rates began increasing, market activity slowed somewhat as the year progressed. Values, however, have continued to climb as there remains a shortage of inventory, and that's everywhere. We're still seeing this shortage. What is changing, however, are the days of multiple bidders, contracts with no contingencies, and sales prices well in excess of listing prices. The total number of transfers were down sharply in 2022, but we believe that was mostly due to supply chain issues and labor shortages. Foreclosures have begun to creep up. I expected this last year, to see this start going up last year, but it didn't, went down again. We had 60 during 2022, and I don't think that's an alarming number, but I do believe we'll see that increase in the next year or two. Median days on the market for sold properties was at 11 2022. That went down again, and it's just another telltale statistic for just how strong the market's been. And then our median sales price for single-family detached homes is at $389,000, and it's up from $338,100 in 2021, and that's a 15% increase. This slide is a little busy, but it provides a quarterly look at the performance across all residential property types. The last few slides dealt with the residential market exclusively, and moving forward, we're going to talk about the commercial side of the house. Commercial market's broken up into segments and based on property type and use. So first, we'll take a look at the multifamily segment. Okay, vacancy rates have expanded significantly in the Suffolk multifamily market. This is a bit misleading, as there were so many new units developed and delivered in 2022. These units are being absorbed at a high rate, and there aren't any indicators of oversupply with rent growth of 2.2% during the year. The average rents are well above the regional average here in Suffolk. Sales volume of apartment complexes in 2022 was 0, which is indicative of the strength of this market. and estimated market price per door for Class A apartments is $239,700. So the industrial market's broken up into two areas for Suffolk, for North Suffolk and South Suffolk. Looking at the North Suffolk industrial market, we see very low vacancy rates with rent growth of 10% and a sales volume of $2.4 million in 2022. This sales volume was one property that sold. The normal volume would be 3 to 4 properties per year. Inventory expanded by over 14.9% in the previous 3 years, but has slowed in 2022. As such, there are no supply-side pressures on vacancy or rents. The South Suffolk industrial market is a much larger market, but seeing similar successes. While vacancy rates are at 6.2%, rent growth over the past 12 months is a little above 11%. New space delivered over the past year represented a 16.4 expansion of inventory, and sales volume in this market has significantly exceeded the 3-year average at $170 million. The retail segment of the commercial market continues to show signs of strength with stable vacancy rates over the past year and surging rents that have grown at a rate of 7.2%. Sales volumes have increased to $19 million in 2022 and reflect a per square foot price of $229. This is well above the region's average pricing. Okay, the office market is divided in north and south segments as well. The North Suffolk office market is a mid-sized submarket with about 1.5 million square feet of space. The vacancy rate is basically unchanged at 5.7% and remains well below the long-term average. Absorption rates are 7,700 square feet, and they remain positive, but are well below the 5-year annual average. Rents grew at 1.8% last year, which is in line with growth over the last 3 years, and sales volume continues to be low in this submarket, which is in line with the last 3 years as well. And finally, the South Suffolk office market. Vacancy rates have risen significantly in 2022 at 5.3% and are just above the long-term average. There's been no new construction in this segment over the past year, and net absorption rate sits at a negative 32,000 square feet. In spite of this negative absorption, in 2022, the net rate over the past 5 years remains positive at 4,400 square feet. Rents grew by just less than 2%, and sales activity has been relatively active. So as you can see, there's been a lot of good news in our real estate market, continuing good news. Let's take a look at what the results of the reassessment were. So we have 41,665 parcels. 2,578 of them are commercial and 1,644 are agricultural, with 37,443 residential parcels. In this reassessment, residential assessments increased by nearly $1.4 billion. Commercial property increased by a little more than $765 million. And total agricultural values decreased by roughly $1.9 million. The total citywide increase is $2.16 billion, or 16.3%. This slide's pretty self-explanatory. You can see our total value comparison from last year to this year. The percentage increase at 16.3%. the dollar value of the increase and the impact on revenue at a little over $23.5 million. And just a side note, every penny on the tax rate equates to a little more than 1.5 million in revenue based on the new assessment. And just a little bit of additional information, the Disabled Veterans Program is growing very rapidly. We have almost 1,400 recipients now, total assessed value of $523 million and $4.2 million in annual exemptions. The Senior Citizens Tax Relief Program has decreased again this year. This is the second year that's happened. It has 1,269 recipients, 249 million in value, and exonerations of almost $2.4 million. So where do we go from here? We will be mailing assessment notices by the second week in March. Informal appeal hearings will be heard through mid-April. Board of Equalization hearings will be conducted in May, and their decisions will be made final by June 30th. And staff will continue to process new construction and alterations for the end of the fiscal year supplements. The land book will be produced at the close of the fiscal year and will be effective July 1, 2023. And I do want to say that this report is, I get to stand up here and give it, but it's the culmination of a lot of hard work by my team back there in my office, and I appreciate all that they do. They really worked hard on this reassessment, and I'm proud of their growth and their hard work that they put into this. This is a big number, and I've done a lot of these now. It's the biggest one I've ever done percentage-wise, but I've never felt more comfortable about where we are with these values than I do this year. I was talking to Kevin about it this morning. After sitting on it for a few days, we've got a lot of data and we put a lot of work into this reassessment, and I really feel comfortable with where we are. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Council, questions or comments? Councilman Fawcett?
Mr. Butt, thank you for the presentation. It's always nice to hear your side of the house. I want to thank you for the last 2 years, what you've done to reshape, the assessor's office. You've certainly done a couple things that are interesting, of course, other than doing the job itself, bringing on the people and doing employee engagement, which I think we were lacking in previous years, as well as utilizing the technology that was not being utilized, and you've found a way with your team to efficiently, incorporate that into a more streamlined operation. And the investment of new technology sounds very impressive. Looking forward to hearing how that comes out. So for all of the team, it's a team effort, and you recognize that, and that's one of the good traits of a leader, is to recognize the team behind you is what makes you look great to stand up here in front of council and give this number. The 16, let me get back in the back where you were at. 16.30 number is a pretty strong number. That's pretty impressive. And, I think that we were lacking in the reassessment issue and some of the issues we had previously, that you've probably been working through that streamline to get that up. So I want to thank you again and your staff, and I appreciate you being here, and all of you for doing what you do. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I do want to address one thing that around your comments there. The 16.3% includes new construction. So these numbers are so fresh off the press, literally, that I haven't been able to get the report to pull out the new construction, but we will do that in the coming days. So it's not all appreciation, so there's some growth in there as well.
Vice Mayor Ward?
Yes, I'd like to also thank you for the job you and your staff have done, because when you came in, there was a whole lot of complaints and a whole lot of things unorganized. And I'd like to thank you also, when I call situations, you will make sure that it's taken care of and you'll respond well, and even get calls back from the people that had a problem. And I thank you so much for jumping on that like you're doing. Thank you. God bless.
Councilperson Butler Barlow.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that. It's always interesting to hear, and kudos to you and your staff also, because I know that you all are doing an excellent job. I have two kind of minor questions. When you're doing the reassessment, you've got 41,666 parcels. Is every single parcel reassessed every year, or is there some sort of a schedule? I mean, is it
We reassess every parcel.
everyone every year?
Mhm.
Okay.
But we do it on a mass basis, so, we're not looking individually at each parcel.
Right. But everyone gets touched on. Okay.
Yes.
That was just a curiosity. And I have to ask, there's a decrease in the value on the agricultural land. Is that because of less acres or less value?
I was
Sorry.
trying to dig into that this afternoon because I didn't quite understand why that number was lower. I think it's because some pieces have been removed, rezoned, or
Right.
removed out of that.
We can go over that in
Yeah.
more detail at
Yeah,
another
I'll
time.
get you
but
more
anyway,
detail on
Thanks. I
that.
just, to see everything else going up and that going down, it just was a concern.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilman Bennett?
Thank you for your presentation. First time we had a chance to take a look at it. It sounded like a very, very good report. One question, though, with the assessment, I probably will get this later. I know in the older neighborhoods, they are building a lot of houses in those neighborhoods, so that's going to probably, will it take some type of effect on increase of assessment value because of that?
So we try to look at the new construction separate of the older homes as much as we can. And I think we do a pretty good job of separating those out. So they shouldn't really affect a lot of the older properties. Where they will have an effect is on their land sales. When these people buy these old properties and tear them down, that's effectively a land sale, and we have to recognize that. And that tends to affect, just about every property in the neighborhood.
Okay, because I know sales in areas make usually increase in value
Mhm.
to other houses around that, because I think they do go by the market value of the new, whatever's being sold. Don't have to be new.
Right.
It's whatever being sold.
Right.
So I'm just being kind of looking at that, because some of the people that live in the older neighborhoods probably would have some questions about that, so.
And we'll remember that question. We'll talk about that,
Right.
going forward.
Okay, thank you, sir. Good report.
Councilman Johnson?
And Billy, I just want to say thank you. It's been a different year for us with you doing the job that you've done, so we really appreciate it. And we appreciate the good numbers and the quick delivery, and it's how it's supposed to be. But thank you. I am curious, though, once the numbers come back for the reassessments versus the new assessments, just curious to see how much of it is going to be new assessment as opposed to the reassessment.
You mean new construction versus?
Yeah, that's what, just so we kind of know where we stand as far as the new development
I
goes. Because we
definitely
know
will.
there's a lot, right? I mean, pretty obviously. And the other one, just like Councilwoman Barlow, I'm concerned about the ag property and why it's gone backwards a little bit. I'm sure there's a reason, but we'll catch up with that later.
I'll
I'm
dig
sure.
into that deeper.
But thank you, and thank your staff for a job well done. We're glad to see things heading in this direction.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Councilman Rector?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Butt, thank you very much for this report. As a realtor, we rely on your office a lot, and it's in the last few years, we've seen a sea change in our relationship with your office, and we thank y'all very much for that, because without the data that you provide us, we cannot do our CMAs or do an effective job with it without accurate information from your office, and we appreciate that. And I do have one question, and this is mostly out of ignorance and not having seen your report before. Can you define for me in these market data things what an absorbed unit is?
So if you build a unit and somebody occupies it, that's a unit that's absorbed. So if somebody builds 10,000 square feet and 5,000 of it gets occupied, that's 5,000 square feet of absorbed space.
Okay. Thank you.
Council, any other questions or comments? If not, Mr. Butt, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you very much for the job that you do every day and that your staff does. In my position, I hear people have issues with lots of things, lots of times, and the assessor's office very rarely, if ever, becomes a topic of discussion. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I know you're responsive, and that's the key. That information is available, and you're able to explain where your assessments, how they're derived, and evidently that must be going well. I'm glad, and I want to reiterate what has been said a couple of times. We talk about value being increased 16.3% across the city. I don't want anybody to get an idea that everybody's tax bill is going up 16.3%. You know, it's a little scary. We'll make sure that doesn't get out there tonight. That includes new construction. And I think part of that new construction was the Amazon building, I think. Was that last year? It's
I think
close.
Amazon
Part of it.
came on it came on last year because they
Part of
appealed.
it. Okay, so I mean, we've got a lot of going on in the city. And when we look at the commercial data, that in itself is very exciting, you know, that we have that type of growth in the commercial sector. And it also doesn't include what we've got in the pipeline. There's things that are being worked on right now that won't be assessed until they're completed,
Correct.
I think. So, and if you look around our city, you drive around our city, you can see we're poised very well, not just for this year, but the future. But having been up here for several years, there were years where we were scrambling to see if we could get 2 or 3 points on real estate. I mean, really pushing hard for the income. And to see this kind of, you know, these kind of numbers says volumes for where we are as a city. The average, the median price of a home at $389. I mean, if we're not number one in Hampton Roads, we got to be close.
We're right up there.
So, I mean, we're right at the top. So that says a lot also. And with that, I did one question. I know you're scanning a lot of your records now, and that's a good thing. We started doing the same thing at work about a year ago. It's a little bit of a pain because you got to scan everything, but it makes it great for recalling data. You don't have to go to files and pull this and see that. You literally can scan every single piece of paper, anything that your assessors have written down. It's going to be on there. Is any of that information available to the public if they go into a particular site?
No, not if the public wants something and they request it. If it's not something that's protected, I have to give it to them, but they can't go on a website and pull it out of the record.
And you could actually recall some of that information and email it to someone, couldn't you, if
Correct.
it was allowed?
Correct.
Which is good too. It's just, you know, rather than having to come in physically and look at a document, you know, if it's something that they're privy to, then you could take that document and email it to them, and they can look at the actual document without coming in. So that's, as far as efficiency and accountability and transparency, we cover all the key words there. You can do all that at one time. And the only other question I had is on our assessments. I know at one time, and I've brought this up before, and I think it would be helpful in today's environment in particular, that on our assessments, and I use it all the time, you can either put in the tax map or the address. If on that piece of property, it also had the zoning designation as to how that piece of property is zoned. And I do not think it's on there. At one
So-
time we did it, we also had an adjoining, when you clicked on that piece of property, you could see the adjoining properties as well. So is there any way we could update our system to allow that?
So are you talking about like my website or the GIS or?
No, I'm talking about to look at real estate assessments, the assessment website. So if you want to see what a piece of property, how it's valued, the last time it was sold, the price, and that sort of, the two-page document. They used to have the zoning on that property also.
We'll have all that on the new website. Just about everything that's on our record will be on the new website.
So it will be on the new website? Because I think that's huge, especially now when people are looking at rezonings and that type of thing, what's around it, how's it going to affect them? And also when you're looking to purchase a piece of property, I think it'd be very handy.
Now-
So that'd be great.
What's around,
I don't know what around it was. I just remember.
we'll have to have a discussion, about what we can do as far as what they can see around it. But if you go on our website and you pull up a parcel, you'll be able to see everything, the sketch, which you can't see now. We'll have a lot more data there than.
Is that on your current website?
No, not on
No,
our
not right
current.
now, but just, okay. All right, well, any improvement, I think, would be a welcome
Yes.
change.
Yes.
And once again, thank you for everything you do. Whatever it is, keep doing the same thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next topic this afternoon is a Nansen Indian Nation update. Mr. Manager?
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, with us this afternoon are representatives for the Nansemond Indian Nation, and they would like to provide a presentation on where they've been over the last few years and where they are headed, and have a discussion with you on the property. At this time, I'd like to invite Tribal Chief Keith Anderson to the podium. Sorry about that, Keith. Keith to the podium to lead off the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council, city staff, and attending friends from the city of Suffolk. Again, thank you for inviting us to join you today. Today, I have with me Nikki Bass, Vice Chair of our Nansemond Tribal Council, and Greg Werkheiser, whose law firm, Culture Heritage Partners, serves as general counsel to our tribe. Councilor Bass and Mr. Werkheiser will be presenting to you today. And, sorry about this. We have respectfully and regularly requested your council's attention to this conversation about 2.5 years ago. I admit that we have been frustrated by that time that has passed, but we come today in the spirit of continued optimism that with your leadership, we can now make some timely progress. We recognize that some of you have previously heard some of the information we will share, but we will hope that you will welcome the refreshment of this topic. Now I ask that Ms. Nikki Bass come and start our presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Nikki Bass, and I live in the Sleepy Hole Bureau off of Bennett's Pasture Road. I'm very excited to be here with you today, and I'd like to start with a personal thank you to each of you for your service to the city of Suffolk. Professionally, I've spent the past 20 years in environmental science and public health. For the first decade of my career, I worked for the Department of Defense on a joint program with the Pentagon protecting our service members from exposure to toxic chemicals in theater and in domestic training settings. I've spent the past 10 years working on federal regulatory programs and the past 5 years in our tribal leadership. During that time, I've had the chance to be supported by some of you, and I'm very grateful for that support. The Nansemond Indian Nation, since 2018, is a federally recognized sovereign government. That recognition was achieved through a special act of Congress, supported by both parties and signed into law by President Trump. 5 other tribal nations in Virginia were recognized through the same act. Federal recognition means that the U.S. government recognizes our right to exist as a sovereign entity, able to govern ourselves and our internal affairs with federal trust obligations, which means that we are independent of direct control of federal or state or local governments, but the federal government has a special responsibility to protect our interests in light of all that the government took from us historically. Our government-to-government relationship with the U.S. government extends to state and local governments as well. With federal recognition comes greater access to sustainable and growing financial and programmatic resources. When these relationships are taken seriously, they can significantly benefit all parties, especially local governments and communities where tribes are headquartered. As we will discuss, our increased access to resources can be used to not only benefit our tribal community, but the greater community at large. For decades, well before federal recognition, our tribe has engaged with the community of Suffolk to demonstrate benefits to Suffolk residents. Our aspiration to improve the government-to-government relationship with Suffolk to the greater benefit of all of our communities. And next, I'd like to welcome Greg to continue our presentation.
Thank you. We're going to swap back and forth a little bit to keep it a little bit more interesting than hearing my droning voice for the whole time. Good evening. Thank you for your service. Appreciate your time and attention this evening. My name is Greg Werkheiser. I'm the founding partner of a law firm called Cultural Heritage Partners. Whenever I am a out-of-town attorney coming to a new audience, I like to spend just a minute introducing myself to reduce the visceral reaction that I encounter. And so if you'll indulge me for just a second. Our law firm is headquartered in Richmond. We have offices in DC, New York, and London. We have an unusual practice. I think we're still the only law firm in the world that focuses exclusively on this niche practice of cultural heritage law. And what that means is that we represent clients around the world who have interests in the preservation of art, antiquities, living cultures, buildings, landscapes. That means frequently we represent municipalities. We have the pleasure of representing some of the most historic municipalities in America, including Block Island and Nantucket and Cape May County and Newport. Communities that are trying to leverage their significant cultural and historic resources for economic benefit and to make them just generally a more hospitable place to live. We also represent tribal nations throughout the world, but in particular in North America, including Canada and the United States. We have the great pleasure of representing 6 of the 7 federally recognized tribes that have headquarters in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we have spent the past number of years as their general counsel helping them set up governments a la the United States 1776. Writing constitutions, shepherding the conversion from the nonprofit organizations they used to be organized under Virginia law to independent domestic sovereigns, which is a very complicated thing to try and explain to anyone, let alone the communities in which these tribes have been historically located that are used to thinking of them as community groups, community interest groups, special interest groups, and nonprofits. The concept that they are now an independent domestic sovereign government within your midst is, I spend half of my day trying to explain this in places across the country. So to the extent that there's any confusion or you have any questions afterwards, please know that we'd like to be a resource to help explain that sometimes complicated concept. Got my undergrad degree in government from William & Mary, got my law degree from the University of Virginia. About 25 years ago, I spent many weekends here in Suffolk because I was dating a girl whose grandfather worked in one of the peanut-associated businesses here in town. That did not work out as a relationship, but I have fond memories from being here on a regular basis. I have to say it didn't work out because the co-founder of my firm and my law partner is my wife. And so I'd like to make it clear that that did not work out, and I ended up with a much better deal in the process. The tribe has 2 requests for you. We've been advancing one of these requests, as the chief suggested, for about 2.5 years. We have been trying to figure out how we can shorten the timeline to get an answer one way or the other on this request, and that's part of the reason for the request to appear in front of you this evening. Because there's some particular time sensitivity, some sand that is running out of the hourglass related to this first request. So the first request is, in 2013, as you know, the community deeded Mackinac Town to the tribe with some conditions. We're going to talk about those, walk you through those, talk about what the tribe has done in the interim in just a second. But the second request is, once we get past this particular challenge about Mackinac Town, we would respectfully suggest that you all think about a way in which to formalize the ongoing discussion with the tribe for all the other opportunities that are present and associated with having a federally recognized tribe in your immediate community. And those are substantial, and we will talk about those in a little bit. So those are our first two requests, including a formalization of ownership and setting up either a committee or a working group so that this dialogue can continue and we can exploit the opportunities in front of us. Going to briefly walk you through the history here, but in 2013, as you know, this deed was executed. The final conveyance included certain conditions. Our assertion to you this evening, in good faith, is that the tribe has in fact exceeded the spirit of the vast majority of the conditions that were attendant to final transfer. We'll tell you exactly how we think they've done that. But one condition that the tribe has not satisfied was the requirement to create a replica 16th century tribal village. Now, I admit that I think I made a mistake early in the consultation with this community, in particular my conversations with your city manager. I think I did not do a good job describing why the tribe's opinion about the construction of the 16th century village has evolved over time, and I may have given offense, especially for folks who were around in 2013 when the ideas were being suggested back and forth as to what would be the expectations of the tribe. So if you'll indulge me, I want to try again and do a better job this time. The sensibilities around cultural tourism in the United States are changing very rapidly. 10 years ago, you could find a lot of tribes that were operating reconstructed villages. The problem that has emerged is that studies show that most Americans, A, don't know that tribes still exist. They just don't know that they're around, especially in the East Coast. That's true. And B, even if they do know they're around, they have this image of them as wearing regalia full-time, living on discrete reservations, living in houses that don't look anything like ours. It's a difficult problem for tribes to be able to say, hey, we're living communities. We're here, we haven't gone, although some of us were gone forcefully into other states, but we're still here. And we're not a caricature. And so it was the tribe's idea, and it was a potentially meaningful one in 2013 to suggest that this would be one of the conditions. But these days, you don't see these being built anymore. What you see is the type of programming that the tribe has actually been doing, demonstrating that they have a living community, that you can walk down the street and they look like us, they live in houses like us, and they are both citizens of the tribe and dually citizens of the communities in which they are located. So the focus from a heritage tourism perspective is really on active programs. For example, as you know, the tribe has been working to restore its oyster beds in the Nansemond River. It's inviting the public in to see that. That is more consistent with what you're seeing going forward. So if I gave previous offense, I think I said something like tribes are trying to get away from a Disneyfied version of it. I apologize, and I hope this second attempt is slightly better. And so what the tribe would like to do is it would like to take the significant amount of access to federal programs and resources that it now has and direct them to doing more of what it has been doing to serve Suffolk, and to make that part and parcel of your larger strategic plan and vision for the community in terms of conservation, environmental protection, public education, and economic development in a way that is incredibly sensitive to the nature of the site and doesn't involve going beyond the original parameters, which was, let's use the site for light purposes, conservation, education, public engagement. I want to kick it back to Nikki before you all fall asleep, and then I'll be back in just a second.
So we're right here. Okay. All right. Yes.
Yep.
I think so. Yes. Okay. So thank you. Our vision for Mattock Town has substantially improved, expanded, and modernized since 2013, excuse me. And we've also secured a $1 million federal grant that will enable us to substantially improve the capacity, operation, and safety of facilities at Mattock Town. But we cannot draw that down until the ownership issues are resolved, and we are facing the prospect that those monies would need to be returned to the federal government. Federal and grant funding is frequently contingent upon our tribal nation owning property outright. For us to leverage these and additional funds and programs, the City of Suffolk needs to finalize the transfer of the property to the tribe. With all that said, we feel that we've delivered great value to Suffolk. As you can see from the slide, our tribal nation has demonstrated great value to Suffolk in many ways, including pandemic response, infrastructure, economy, civic, conservation, and education. Over the past few years of the pandemic, we've distributed vaccines, personal protective equipment, food to Suffolk residents. We've also installed 2 miles of underground cable, making high-speed internet available at Mattock Town and to the community parcels along the route. We host annual powwows, public festivals, and attract and educate thousands of visitors. We also host Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, homeschool children, and many other community groups at Mattock Town. And as Greg mentioned, we're actively restoring the oyster beds in the Nansemond River, improving water quality, and are now conserving 500 acres of land at Cross Swamp. We host numerous cultural and educational programs for public audiences, and we're proud to serve our family, friends, and neighbors in Suffolk. We hope you will recognize this mutually beneficial relationship.
I want to just emphasize 2 things that Nikki just said. One is the vast majority of the programs that she just described are not only internally tribal-facing programs. When the tribe had excess reserves to folks in the community, the food bank serves people in the community, the education programs serve people in the community. There are communities around the country that would kill for the opportunity to have a federally recognized tribe in their midst that has this level of activity and engagement in the community, and I'm sure you all have been to a lot of these events and appreciate that. The second thing I'll say is that that $1 million, I didn't want that to skip by you. The $1 million has been sitting in an account now for 1.5 years, almost 2 years, ready to be drawn down, to be spent doing the types of stuff that were conditions of the original piece. My advice to them as a lawyer is don't draw it down, because the federal government is under a presumption that they own Mattock Town, and there is this condition hanging out there. And so there is a real chance that they'll be taking $1 million and sending it back to the federal government. And nothing makes me more upset in my practice than sending a single penny that could be in a community back to the federal government when it could be used to your benefit. But that is also true for a lot of the other programs and federal pools of resources that the tribe could be drawing down, we're going to reach a hiccup and be unable to access those funds if the ownership piece is still in dispute. Let's see. So I want to just highlight the types of programs that come with sometimes substantial, sometimes millions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars from the federal government that these tribes can now access. They address topics around land and water conservation, K through 12 education, health care, cultural heritage preservation, emergency preparedness and response, heritage tourism, public safety, broadband access, you've already heard. Those were federal dollars that were used to run those lines. Even nonpartisan voter registration and infrastructure development. The tribes are specifically called out in the federal administration's infrastructure bill. They could be helping you bring resources here for which you would otherwise not be qualified. So that's the hiccup we're trying to get around. Now, we have heard so far a couple of concerns from city staff. I believe we have solutions to all of them, and that's why we're coming to you tonight to ask if there's anything else that we haven't heard that would be a reason for us not to proceed with cleaning up the deed. The first thing we've heard is that you have some concerns that if this transfer is fully completed, that the tribe will do something different with the land than is in your expectations and what is currently in the tribe's expectations. So again, the tribe's planned uses are for conservation, cultural and environmental education, recreation, and community support, and that's it. And we are the tribe is willing to sign an MOU that will bind them to not using it for anything else. We've drafted an exchange with city staff about 6 versions of the MOU, and I don't know if you've seen it yet, but would love for you to see it soon, to review it and to approve it as a way of addressing any remaining concerns you have about the tribe's intent. And then the second piece is that we've heard that the city is concerned that there be better and more thoughtful coordination between public access to the Matnocktown parcel and the Lone Star Lakes parcel. Fine, great. Would love to have that working group or another working group work that out over time. We're happy to put provisions, if we don't have them there, I think we already do, in the MOU saying that that's our intent, is to ensure consistent public access. So if there are other things that we have not heard, we would love to hear them so that we can address them. The provisions in the MOU, we even borrowed one from recent precedent because the Commonwealth of Virginia has itself been transferring properties to the federally recognized tribes, recognizing that doing so is both great for conservation and for heritage tourism and economic development. And one of the provisions they put in their paperwork was to say that if for some reason the tribe violates the MOU and starts to build, housing or something on the property, that the tribe would have to, as an additional penalty for whatever violations in the MOU, the tribe would have to buy and give back to Suffolk land of equal character and value. They got some new money. They don't have that kind of new money. All right? So there's enough teeth in this for you all, I believe, comfortably to turn to your constituents and say, we looked out for the community's interest. And at the end of the day, when these relationships between tribes and communities work, there is a little bit of a trust gap that has to be reached and closed. And so we're not going to be able to put in a document the answers to everybody's concerns about what it means to have a federally recognized tribe. We can get close. At the end of the day, they're going to have to trust you, you're going to have to trust them, and that's the basis of productive long-term relationships. Nikki, I think you're supposed to come back up because I hear my own voice echoing in my head. I think right there.
Great. Okay, so there are many successful examples from across the country of how communities have supported tribal land acquisition to the benefit of the greater community. There are also great examples of returning land to tribal nations right here in Virginia. For example, last October, Ducks Unlimited, one of the nation's largest conservation groups, acquired more than 500 acres of ancestral land of the Nansemond Indian Nation from a private owner and returned it to the tribe for protection and stewardship, a precedent-setting land transfer. This is part of a trend where governments are increasingly trusting tribes to do what we did for thousands of years before colonization, care for our land and waters in ways that are sustainable. We hope that the city of Suffolk will follow this example and transfer the property of Matnocktown to the tribe. And I'll just add a little bit to that. Yesterday afternoon, I went to the Virginia Institute of Marine Science to lecture some of the students studying fisheries there. And it was a wonderful conversation to talk about this theme of how restoring oyster beds filters our water in the Nansemond River, and protecting wetlands is a natural filtration system to clean the water, clean the groundwater, and reduce flooding in the community. So we're thinking about this from so many different directions, improving access to outdoor space for our tribe, the citizens here in Suffolk, and building a research base to inspire creativity and thoughts about future projects that can, boost a lot of different opportunities and jobs for citizens here. So I will pass it back to Greg.
I hope I'm almost done. Let's see. I'll just say this, that we would love for Suffolk leadership to be as comfortable reaching out regularly now to the tribe to figure out how to collaborate to the benefit of the larger community, as other communities in the Commonwealth are. There are other municipalities that are in the historic footprint of the Nansemond Indian Nation who are burning up the phones, calling the chief saying, hey, how can we get you to come down and do some of your stuff here? The major foundations in Virginia around the country are aware of the fact that some of the most recently federally recognized tribes in the country are the Virginia tribes. And so major philanthropies are beginning to turn their attention towards how they can support community programs. So there's a lot of value out there to be exploited. It just requires the intent and a little bit of the time that you all have, which is overstressed by everything else you've got going on. But I can just tell you from a nationwide perspective, dealing with communities and tribes across the country, that the communities that get it right, that take that extra time and elevate the level of dialogue and mutual respect, really benefit from it. Not just at the leadership level, but on the ground in terms of citizen services and availability. So I'm here to attempt to answer any questions that you might have that either fall into the bucket of the Matnocktown issue, the second question asked of what would a committee look like, long-term relationship. Our initial thinking was not sophisticated. It was maybe one or two of you, maybe one or two folks from tribal leadership, maybe 3 or 4 citizens at large who have an interest in supporting this, and just let them get together and run down the list of things that are coming in every day. It's a struggle for us to keep up with the amount of opportunities that the tribe has and the paperwork that goes along with it. So we'd love to share that challenge with you in ways that you can point to your constituents in terms of having value. So anything about Matnocktown, anything about that, or anything at all about questions related to federal recognition of tribes and relationships to communities. I will tell you, not to raise any kind of hornet's nest, but Virginia's still figuring this out, right? We have treaties from the 1600s that say certain things about the tribal government relationship that predate the United States, and the lawyers in the Attorney General's office and my office are trying to figure out what of that is enforceable, right? It's fascinating. It's if you're into Virginia history, it's really compelling, but it's like drinking out of a fire hose. And one of the things that we're eager to kind of put behind us and kind of reset is the relationship here and this technical question about ownership of Matnocktown. questions for me or Nikki or the chief, if that's appropriate.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Workhauser.
Yeah.
Council, questions or comments? Councilperson Butler Barlow.
I have a quick question. First of all, I'm very supportive was in on some of the original conversations, very tangentially, but with the Mattinock Town Plan. And I realize a lot of time has passed and a lot of things have changed. And I think it would be really great if we could really reset and kind of start this conversation new, because what's happened has happened, and, we need to go on to the next step. But the question that I have, and, I said, feeling very supportive, but the question I have is the land that was recently given to the nation, the Cross Swamp property, does that not unlock the land ownership piece with the $1 million?
Only things that we would do on that property, and
Okay.
that property is largely for conservation.
Okay, so it's specifically tied to the Mattinock Town property?
Yes.
Okay, that was my question, thanks.
Thank you for that question.
Councilman Williams?
Thank you, Mayor. I just need you, if you would, explain to me what is MOU.
Oh, yes. So it's shorthand for a contract agreement, a memorandum of agreement or a memorandum of understanding. So it's just the common form in which lawyers put down commitments, and it has a lot of whereas clauses, right? So whereas the town supports the tribe, whereas the tribe supports the city, whereas there's a commitment to using this land for conservation. Once you go through all that, then it just is a standard contract basically saying what the parties' expectations are of one another.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Council, any other questions or comments? Vice Mayor Ward?
How long will the $1 million be safe? How long will it be safe? You said if we don't respond to it.
We are on borrowed time. We had to make a special request for an extension. The time expired at the end of last year. And that brought some urgency of our conversations with the city manager and council. We didn't get it done in time for maybe some of the concerns that we think we've subsequently addressed, but it's a matter of months. If we can't get it wrapped up, that money goes back, and then until it's resolved, the other stuff that we're filling out applications for now isn't going to come through, or I won't let them accept it because the risk is too great.
So you saying you want us to make a decision in a matter of months?
Yes, sir. And normally, I would say that's unreasonable. But we've been asking for this conversation and this decision for 2.5 years. So this dialogue, the first memo I sent to the city saying, can we please discuss this transfer, was 2.5 years ago. And there's been a lot of back and forth. Now, I realize it may not have reached your plate. It started under a different chief. That's how long ago it was now. I think there's been some changes in city staffing. So normally I'd say that's crazy if you want to achieve something in 2 months, but it would be 2 months added onto 30 months of discussion.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Rector?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned several times in the beginning of your presentation going back to the original, 2013 agreement, and the contingencies that were in that agreement. You mentioned several times that you felt like the spirit of the agreement had been upheld. And I know that, you'll have to explain to me as a lawyer. I know that there's the letter of the law and there's the spirit of the law. Are there other contingencies other than the creation of the village, the reenactment thing that we're not, done? Or
That's the primary one. There's a question of, what does a museum look like? And does it have to be a formal building? The tribe certainly has exhibit space there currently. But the hiccup is really around the village piece, which was central. Oh, and Nikki's coming up, which means she's going to give a better answer than what I was going to give. But from a lawyer's perspective, you all could look at this and say, the intent of the original contingencies was to say, tribe, don't just go away. We're not just going to give you the land. We want you to do something that benefits the community. They've done dozens of things that weren't contingencies that we think are basically the community benefit equivalent of that. So if you were to direct your council and us to work it out, there's nothing that can't be changed about it. That is to say, no one's going to come down and say, you didn't build this 16th century village, you have to undo it. We have the legal capacity to work this out. Nikki?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Another part of the agreement was that we would accept the property in as-is condition. And I think that's important to recognize because with the history of the site and the Lone Star Cement Corporation, we accepted it with a lot of invasive species, erosion, and Cedar Creek and along the front. There's an environmental degradation, and we're accepting that because we'd like to pursue resources to restore the site for our benefit, for the community. And we see it as a valuable resource as part of the whole Lone Star Lakes Park system and something that we can really bring to life. We can bring the trail systems to life. We've had surveys done for the types of trees growing there and develop plans to plant native plants and create just a very active environment for community engagement.
Council, any other questions or comments? If not, I've got a few comments. Might have a question in there somewhere. Trying to put all this into perspective. I believe the original plan, and I don't have it in front of me, was written in 2007 and presented to city at that time for consideration, and that action was not taken until the end of 2010, if I'm not mistaken, because it was before I was elected. Councilman Bennett, I believe, is the only sitting member that was there when it was passed. There's no doubt I'm absolutely in favor of Montauk Town. I'm absolutely in favor of using that site for its historical, cultural, educational, environmental, conservation, whatever you want to put, it's all going to tie in to the area and specifically Lone Star Lake. My way of thinking, it needs to be a partnership between the nation and the city of Suffolk so we can work together where Lone Star Lakes is the key as far as the recreational aspect, not that you don't have it also, but your side of the picture would be more centered on educational experience and historical and talking about the tribe. So how do we make that happen? But going back to my original, I want to put this all into perspective. In, I believe, December of 2010, the city agreed to transfer the property with certain conditions. Those certain conditions were predicated on the plan that was presented, which was a 5-year plan. That 5-year plan basically said, we don't need any money, and we're going to do $6,848,535 worth of improvements, to include a powwow facility, a museum, a tribal center, caretakers, and I realize that things have changed. And that obviously didn't happen, but that was the agreement. So now it's a matter of, and I want to apologize because if it's anybody's fault, if you will, or any reason why we're at this particular juncture, is because the city did not, we as the city and myself, everybody included, did not act on the 5-year contingency. And in reality, at the end of 5 years, we should have been having this discussion. This did not happen. So where do we go from here? And that's kind of where we are right now. But I want to put it all into perspective. That 2.5 years that you've talked about that have gone by, we have had multiple discussions in closed session to kind of get a direction. Everybody wants it to happen. But at the same time, it's a very, very valuable piece of property that our citizens used on a regular basis. And so it's not our property, it's the citizens' property. So it's a matter of, if we're going to do the transfer, which I hope we do, what assurances are we going to have that the facility will indeed be used? And I know we can have a memorandum of understanding, and they're pretty cool, but they really don't count in a court of law for anything. I mean, it just says, okay, I propose on doing this, you propose on doing that, and the city attorney can correct me, but memorandums of understanding are just that. So we need, to the extent that we can, ensure that, and I know in the broad aspect, we talked about conservation, we talked about education, but we need to start sitting down and having conversations, specific conversations, so we can develop a strategic plan as to how we can work with the Nansemond Indian Nation, what we may be able to provide, what you'll provide, and come up with a strategic plan that everybody on council is comfortable with. And I think at that point, to the extent that we can, and like Greg mentioned, a lot of this is just got to be a trust factor. I mean, it's just got to be a trust factor. Because contracts, as far as I understand, especially with the recognition as a national tribe or sovereignty or whatever, there's only so much that can be done as far as enforcement is concerned. So it needs to be a partnership, and we need to start having this conversation. I mean, it's been put off too long. So I am going to suggest to the city manager, with the rest of council, concurrence, that we have another discussion and start seriously, okay, where do we go from here? Just now, just like Councilperson Butler Barlow said, what's done is done, what's over is over. Let's start from scratch. These are the resources. You've got hopefully more resources now. Let's look at division on both sides, come together, develop a plan. It may not be specific to a time, but develop a plan, put it in writing, and whether it can be enforced or not be enforced, I mean, we have to trust that it will be followed to the extent that it can. So that would be my suggestion, and I'm just trying to put everything into perspective here so we can move forward and try to make this happen. It's pretty much, I mean, for lack of a better expression, I mean, to me, it was kind of a political hot potato at one point, so it just got put on the back burner. So I'm open for your remarks.
I appreciate that. MOUs are enforceable. Tribes can waive sovereign immunity for any purpose they want, including to be sued for the failure to enforce a contract. And so the idea that we could come up with an agreement and and you would not have any way to enforce it is just, that to some reason is demonstrably not correct, which is why it's been so confusing to us as to why the enforceability question. Literally every day now, I'm dealing with a community that has solved this issue in the Commonwealth for the other tribes. I'm dealing every day with the Commonwealth of Virginia, which has solved this exact issue. No, I'm not talking about the specific historical back and forth about the proposal. I'm talking about the legal aspect of this so that communities can feel comfortable and that they can trust tribes. And so I guess we have a chicken and egg problem, right? Which is there has to be a certain element of trust to move forward, but we have to move forward quickly, or the very resources that we need to deliver on it will not be available to the tribe, or they will be forced into the choice they don't want to make, which is they can take those resources and put them in other properties in other communities. That's not what they're looking to do. Their heart is in Suffolk. Their historic areas are elsewhere, But I can tomorrow call the federal government and say that $1 million, we're going to invest it in programming in Virginia Beach. The next 10 million that comes in, going to Virginia Beach. So the chicken and egg problem we have is that sir, respectfully, if we spend another 6 months in the planning process, that's going to cost us millions of dollars that could be spent on things that I think we all agree we want. So the question is, are we at enough of a point with an imperfect situation to be able to take a step together in this direction and get your legal counsel to the point of where they can certify that they're comfortable that you have some means to enforce what the tribe is willing to say. And absolutely, I wasn't around back in, I wasn't here as counsel back in 2013 or 2010. It was, as a state-only recognized tribe, it was certainly ambitious of the tribe or anyone to be talking about the amount of money that they hoped to pull in. Because state-recognized tribes only in this country, for better or worse, they can be fully legitimate tribes, but they don't get anything. Virginia recognizes the tribe, there's not a single dollar of financial benefit that comes from that. And so now, it's actually realistic to deliver on not just the contingencies you talked about, but a lot more than was ever contemplated in 2013. So what I'd say is, I believe in the enforcement of contracts, made my career around it, people should keep their commitments, but we also live in a world that has changed substantially, both in terms of the realistic access that the tribe has to resources, but also there are still strings attached to it. I wish it were money that didn't have deadlines, but that's our sense of urgency. So what we're asking you is, yes, absolutely, let us sit down on a regular basis and work through all the things that you would work through to manage a significant property like this. But if we wait to have all that planning session before you address the ownership issue with constraints, everybody's going to lose. It would be our point. So welcome any additional comments.
Based
Sir.
on that, I mean, it would be my suggestion that we don't have to go into specifics per se, but maybe have another meeting or so where we can outline what we would be comfortable with without, so we can move the process along quickly. 30, 60 days, something of that nature maybe. Hopefully, we could possibly do something that quick. And this is just me, so I'm just putting it out there, but I think it's important that we do that. Even though it's chicken and eggs, we need to get a little idea before we do something with the chicken and worry about whether we're going to get an egg or not. So we got to kind of, have some understanding and some in the MOU, if it's no more than the tribe agrees to collaborate with the city before you do blip, whatever that may be. So that kind of protects our interest. Without going into specifics, and then that's when we get to the point, like you said, maybe we put a committee together and get some citizens together and some tribe members together, and then we really drill down into what those specifics will be.
Yes, sir. I think if you were to look at in speaking with Kevin, he indicated that there'd be a willingness to put the MOU in front of you shortly. I think you'll find in there the best model of these from around the country. We looked at 50 different examples, pulled in all the common reassurances that communities need. And I would just say this about the chicken and egg piece, because I love me some metaphors. Look at what the tribe has been delivering without ownership of the property, just because they want to do it and it's the right thing to do. Imagine just carry that intent over.
Well, like I said, there's absolutely no question there we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So it's kind of a moot point. Council, any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much for your presentation, and hope we will be moving forward with Councilman Military used to say, with deliberate speed.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, I do understand that we have a need for a closed session this evening. Madam Clerk, if you will please read the motion for consideration.
Pursuant to Virginia Code Sections 2.2-3711A8 And A1, consultation with legal counsel employed by a public body regarding the specific legal matters requiring the legal advice of such counsel and the discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for appointment and the assignment, appointment, and performance of specific public officers or appointees of the city, specifically the appointments as shown on the attached list for vacancies or term expirations for the Early Childhood Development Commission, the Economic Development Authority, the Historic Landmarks Commission, the Local Board of Building Code Appeals, the Tidewater Youth Services Commission, and the Wetlands Board. Item number 2, pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A3, the discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or of the disposition of publicly held real property where a discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, specifically tax map and parcel number 10*46.
Council, motion has been presented. Councilman Williams, got a motion for approval from Councilman Williams, Councilperson Butler Barlow.
Second.
Second from Councilperson Butler Barlow. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none. Council members prepare to vote. Please cast your vote. Madam Clerk, please record the vote.
Motion is approved by a vote of 8-0.
That concludes our work session, and we will reconvene at 6 p.m.